we join the international agreement for preventing the use and acquirement of chemical weapons before that resolution.
President Assad tells Italian Rai 24 TV channel that Syria joined the agreement forbidding chemical weapons before the resolution of the UN Security Council. Al-Muallim discusses with foreign ministers of Iran, Iraq and Cuba the necessity of making the supporters of terrorist gangs stop violating international law and jeopardizing world peace and security. And Syria strongly condemns the terrorist explosions in Erbil and other cities in Iraq. Good afternoon, this is news in English from the Syrian television in Damascus. In an interview with the Italian Rai News 24 TV channel, President Bashar al-Assad asserted that the Russian initiative about chemical weapons was based on the will of Syria, which had proposed saving the region from weapons of mass destruction in the year 2003 and submitted this proposal to the United Nations Security Council. Syria today is concentrating on efforts to get rid of terrorism, according to President Assad.
It's a very important moment because UN Security Council just approved at unanimity a resolution asking Syria to eliminate completely his chemical weapons. Are you going to comply with this?
Actually, we join the international agreement for preventing the use and acquirement of chemical weapons before that resolution came to light. The main part of the Russian initiative based on our will to do so. So it's not about the resolution, actually it's about our will. Of course, we have the will because in 2003 we had a proposal in the United Nations, the Security Council, to get rid of those weapons in the Middle East, to have a chemical weapon free zone in the Middle East. So of course we have to comply. This is our history, to comply with every treaty we sign.
So with no limit to any extent?
According to every chapter in the agreement, we don't have any reservation. That's why we decided to join the agreement.
As for the project of reform in Syria, the President asserted that it needed a comfortable atmosphere in the economic, political and ideological fields. The President pointed out that one of the most important blocks of implementing reform was the Western invasion, the obscurant ideology of Al-Qaeda and other internal and external factors.
Mr. President, I do remember the beginning of your presidency, and you were looked as a symbol of hope for Syria, because everybody knew that you knew the word and you came here to give it more modern society, open. Intellectuals, young people were looking at you in this way. Then something happened in between. Do you think there's a chance you could do something so dramatically different to be seen again in that position and not in the one in which you're seen in the very last days?
You have to talk about internal factors and external factors, because we're part of the very complicated region in the world. So we will be affected, and there's daily interactions with our periphery. The internal factor, which is that when you talk about reform, it's not the reform of the president or the government. The government and the president should lead the reform, but it's about the whole society, because it's a matter of culture. It's not only laws and constitution. The laws and constitutions are means for the change, but the real change happens by the people themselves. So according to our reality, when you talk about thousands of years of civilization, you are talking about mores and customs and the traditions and ethos and folkways and different things that related to every society. And our society is very complicated because of this multifarious culture that we've had. So it was moving forward. You cannot say that we didn't do anything. Some people say that it was fast, some people say that it was too slow. This is subjective. Each one see it in his own way. But at the end, no one can say that we are in our position because we moved forward could be slowly but surely. This is the first part. Second, you have to talk about external obstacles. When I became president, 2 months later, the Intifada in Palestine started. That influenced every country in the Arab world. The peace process actually has failed just a few months before I became president, and there was stalemate. 11th of September happened, and we have to pay the price. One of the countries that has to pay the price. They invaded Afghanistan, we were against. They invaded Iraq, we were against. And after 2003, after the invasion of Iraq, Syria had to pay the price, and there was embargo by the European and the West, and so on. There was only a period of, let's say, artificial period of conciliation, let's say, between Syria, which is not could be not the very precise word, but kind of rapprochement again between Syria and the Western, especially Europeans, between 2008 and 2011. Why artificial? Because it was under the supervision of the Americans. It wasn't genuine because they weren't independent. So, and now we have the crisis. When you talk about reform, especially when you talk about dramatic reform, you need different atmosphere. You have to be comfortable economically, politically, and ideologically. Don't forget, in that regard, one of the external and internal factors at the same time is the invasion of the bad ideologies to the region, including Syria. And I mean the ideology of Al-Qaeda that invaded many communities in our region, including part of the Syrian society. You cannot talk about reform and democracy while the ideologies are single-minded ideologies that don't accept any other one. Because democracy, real democracy, is about accepting the other. Started by accepting the other, first of all, especially in diverse society. So I can say that we are still having the same will to move forward in that regard according to our realities. So the scope of the reform will be limited by our realities.
In other news, Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim, leading Syria's delegation to the United Nations General Assembly in New York, held meetings with the foreign ministers of Iran, Iraq and Cuba. He discussed with the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Jawad Zarif recent developments on the regional and international arenas and the efforts to find a solution for the Syrian crisis and the Iranian nuclear file, stressing Syria's commitment to its pledges of joining the agreement forbidding chemical weapons and its readiness to join the Geneva Conference. The two ministers reaffirmed the depth of bilateral relations and the necessity to consolidate them to serve the interests of the friendly peoples of the two countries. They also stressed the importance of the political solution to the crisis in Syria through dialogue without any foreign interventions. They also stressed the necessity of making supporters of the terrorist gangs stop their violations of international law and threats of regional and international peace and security. Mr. al-Muallim discussed with his Iraqi counterpart, Hoshyar Zebari, the current developments and the threats to the security of both countries by the terrorist gangs, including the so-called Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State of Iraq and Asham. Mr. al-Muallim discussed with the Cuban Foreign Minister the strong friendship between the two countries and the recent regional and international developments. The Cuban minister stressed Cuba's rejection of the Western attempts of hegemony and intervention in the internal affairs of other countries, stressing Cuba's rejection of foreign military intervention in the affairs of developing countries like Syria. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called upon the Western countries and their allies in the region to send a signal to the Syrian opposition to desist from any provocations that could disrupt the implementation of the Russian-American agreement about Syria's chemical weapons and the international resolution recently approved on this subject. Lavrov said that Russia believed that the Syrian government would never allow any disruption of the implementation of that resolution. Any disruption resulting from provocations would be responsibility of the Western powers and their allies in the Gulf and in the region in general. The Syrian government strongly condemned the terrorist explosions in Erbil and other Iraqi cities. It asserted in its statements that the terrorism had no identity and no religion, and that all countries should cooperate to confront the phenomenon of world terrorism. The government extended serious condolences to the families of the martyrs in brotherly Iraq. A number of citizens were killed and several others were injured in a terrorist car bomb at the roundabout of Jdeida al-Shibani town. The blast left material damage in the buildings and the surrounding properties. Units of the Syrian Arab Army continue their operations and chasing terrorists and achieving progress in various areas across the country, killing and wounding many of the gunmen.
In Damascus countryside, a unit of the Syrian Arab Army repulsed terrorist gangs in Al-Qalamun. In Latakia countryside, the Syrian Arab Army killed several terrorists from the so-called Al-Nusra Front in various villages. The Syrian Arab Army destroyed their weapons, including heavy machine guns and various types of ammunition. In Aleppo, the Syrian Arab Army destroyed rocket launchers and mortar guns during a series of operations against terrorist groups and their hideouts. They also defeated terrorist groups in other villages nearby. In Deir ez-Zor, the Syrian Arab Army defeated terrorists who were trying to bring vehicles full of weapons into the city and destroyed their hideouts in the village of Al-Mra'i. In Idlib, the army destroyed stores of weapons and ammunition, including Grad rockets and anti-aircraft guns, killing and wounding many terrorists, including the leader of the so-called Al-Sham Brigade.
The Indian paper New York Track Indy asserted that there are 100,000 mercenaries, terrorists from 83 nationalities in Syria. The strategy of military victory of our heroic army is forcing many states to admit the death of their nationals in Syria. Belgium admitted the death of Ahmad Dakhaghi, who was fighting in the ranks of the extremist gangs. Sources asserted the existence of nearly 200 Islamic fanatics fighting in Syria.
The differences among these terrorists reflected the differences among the states supporting them. Qatar employs a group of terrorists and Saudi Arabia employs another group, and so on. The aim is to protect the Zionist entity. This was also asserted by the weekly magazine Genes. The American agency Pentapolis gave statistics about the dead terrorists in Syria. They included 1,900 dead terrorists from Tunisia, in addition to similar figures from Libya, Morocco, and smaller numbers from Algeria, Mauritania, and Egypt. The RTBF Belgian TV channel said that the Belgian terrorists killed in Syria was the 10th. The European coordinator of combating terrorism, Gilles de Korchov, had announced that several thousand terrorists from Europe were fighting in Syria. They would constitute a serious threat to security when they return to their European countries. However, a question remains about the role of the Western governments in saving themselves from their own exported terrorism and avoiding its crimes.
In Lebanon, the Lebanese army seized a truck loaded with weapons and military equipment near the eastern borders with Syria intended to be smuggled into Syrian territories. The Lebanese army seized the truck at the checkpoint of Wadi Shab in the town of Arsal in northern Beqa. They arrested its driver, who was the Lebanese Maher Abdullah from Wadi Khalid. The Lebanese army had arrested during the past few months a number of smugglers and criminal gangsters who committed dozens of robbing and looting acts. With this, we end our news for today. Thank you for watching. More details on our website in English, www.syriaonline.sy. Now to the latest in the world of market and finance in our economic news, but after the break.
Good afternoon. The director of Conserva Company in Damascus clarified that the company has signed contracts to secure the supplies of its production. The company secured the largest possible quantities of supplies to implement the contract with the public bodies. He pointed out that the company is determined to exert all efforts to make this a success and to increase the production and diversity of products. Banking sources said that the Central Bank of Syria is still carrying a tight campaign against the money dealers who deal in foreign currencies and violate the law. This campaign led to the decrease in the dollar exchange rate, particularly in the black market, where the dollar reached a low level in just 2 weeks. Brent crude oil fell to below $108 a barrel and was headed for its first monthly decline since May, as tensions in the region eased and a potential U.S. government shutdown clouded the outlook for demand. Prices declined in the local markets by 100 Syrian pounds per gram following the decline of the dollar exchange rate. The Jewelers Assembly chairman said that this decline is due to the stability of the markets, pointing out that the daily local selling is stable and that it ranges from 8 to 10 kilograms a day. And now over to some main currencies exchange rates according to the bulletin of the Central Bank of Syria. With this, we conclude our news. Thank you for watching and goodbye.